Hi, Arlie.
Hi, Bob.
How are you?
I'm really well. Thank you.
Good. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright. This is The Wright Show, available in streaming video and audio podcast as well. You are Arlie Hochschild, a very well-known sociologist at UC Berkeley, and also the author of a number of books, including most recently Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right. That's been getting a lot of attention. It's nominated for a National Book Award. Congratulations on that.
Thank
You
you.
find out later in November whether you got that, right?
That's right. By the 17th.
This would be big. Do you go to an actual ceremony like Academy
Yeah.
Award style and then get humiliated if you don't get it?
In New York, yeah.
That's so great.
Already good news.
That's so great to have an 80% chance of humiliation. No, it's an honor, of course. Whatever happens, and congratulations. But there's another reason you've been getting a lot of attention with this book, which is it's very relevant to the current political moment. I mean, the way it's being described is that you went and spent 5 years researching in Trump land, getting to know the people who support Trump in Louisiana, as it happens. But of course, the project didn't start out that way because 5 years ago, nobody was thinking about Trump. So before we get into what you've learned about Trump land, why don't you tell us what the original motivation for the project was?
Yes. 5 years ago, in 2011, I was already becoming disturbed, really, by the split in the country between liberals, progressives on one side and conservatives on the other. The government was at a standstill, not doing anything. And I realized that we were all in enclaves, geographic enclaves and media enclaves, electronic enclaves, and that I was in mine and some people I totally didn't understand were in another.
What is yours, by the way? How would you describe your own little cocoon?
Okay. I live in Berkeley, California.
Okay, that's all you need to say. We know the rest.
Well, you
Flaming
might
lefty.
know less, but yeah, it's a lot of it's racially diverse and it's proudly progressive, and there are three bins for discarding your garbage, so there's a great belief in recycling. You'll hear a lot of foreign languages, people on their cell phone walking. You'll see a bicycle lane. There's a lot of bookstores, a lot of coffee shops.
So cosmopolitan, left of center on balance.
Yes.
Diversity is a good word
Yes, it is.
in where you live.
And what I came to realize, or explore, was, do we have a diversity of empathy? And I felt that, wait a minute, there's one group that we don't know anything about or really empathize with, and they're the people who oppose everything that we believe in. So I decided 5 years ago to get out of my bubble and try and find a bubble as far away as I possibly could. And so the right, I realized, had been most rapidly expanding in the South. So I thought, good, I want to go to the South. Among whites, most rapidly expanding among whites. I thought, good, it'll be whites. Among older people, okay, older whites, South, but I didn't know where in the South. Well, I found out that in 2012, half of whites in California voted for Barack Obama. And in the South as a whole region, a third had. But that in Louisiana, only 14% of whites voted for Barack Obama. So I thought, perfect, that's Louisiana, whites older.
Okay, and when you say you thought there was an empathy shortage, within your tribe toward these people. Are you talking about emotional empathy, like kind of feeling their pain, or just understanding what the world looks like to them in the first place?
Really, really both. Really both. And what I realized I would have to do is take my own moral, social, and political alarm system off and just permit myself curiosity and interest in some people with whom I knew I would have differences.
Okay.
And the surprise was that they were worried about this divide too, and they were welcoming. Well, we're just the flyover state, and people aren't interested in us. Thanks for coming and trying to find out who we are.
Mm-hmm. So, describe the landscape for us. I mean, I guess stereotypically people think of Trump land. They think of maybe, I don't know, semi-rural, small ranch-style house or trailer park, pickup truck parked in the driveway, and so on. What was this part of Louisiana like?
That you described parts of the region that I found myself traversing, but my adventure began around southwest Louisiana, and in particular the town of Lake Charles, which is a center of petrochemical processing. And in fact, it was in a feverish state of expanding the existing petrochemical companies to make use of what is now abundant and cheap natural gas, the product of fracking. So it was an industrial area, and while I didn't have the environment on my mind when I went, as soon as I got there and smelled the air and felt a little sting in my eyes when I crossed the bridge from Lake Charles to Westlake, I thought, whoa, wait a minute, the environmental protection of the citizenry is a big issue, and here are people who are very suspicious of the government and even regulators of polluters. So this is an interest, this must be in their self-interest to breathe clean air and swim in clean waters and eat fish from clean waters. Surely this is their interest, should be in getting effective government protection. So that became kind of my keyhole issue that emerged once I was there. I should say that I began with what I thought of as a red state paradox. How could it be that the poorest states, the states with the worst education, with the most polluted environment, with the worst health, with the lowest life expectancy, were also the same states that received more money in aid from the federal government than they gave to it in tax dollars, and were against the federal government. I thought, wait a minute, if you've got some problems, wouldn't you welcome some help? And Louisiana, I discovered, was a super red state paradox, because in 2014 it was the poorest state in the Union. 44% of its state budget came from the federal government, and it was very heavily Tea Party enthusiasts, and now Trump supporters. So it was that was the question I carried around like a backpack.
Yeah. Well, when you say that, what comes to mind is the Thomas Frank thesis in the famous book What's the Matter with Kansas, where, I mean, I haven't read the book, but I gather he points to this kind of seeming irony that the people who are not being served by the policies of the Republican Party favor the Republican Party. And you might think, if that's the issue, that you could just kind of like explain, go there and explain, well, wait a second, it's policies passed by the supported by the Democratic Party that are giving you certain minimal guarantees that are good for you, that would regulate polluters, and so you'd have less pollution and so on. and then everything would be straightened out, and red states would become blue states, and so on. Before we get a little more into the actual anthropology you did in the process of getting to know these people, did you come out of this thinking, actually, it's more complicated than that?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So we'll save maybe for later.
I don't think just say, yeah, that's right.
Go ahead.
Duped. No, that doesn't do it.
To just say that they've been duped and all they need is the enlightenment of a Berkeley sociologist.
No.
Okay, so we'll get back to that. Why don't you
talk about that enlightenment, I should say, but it's a shared enlightenment, I should say. And I learned things I didn't know also before.
What was the biggest?
It's not that they don't know what their interest is.
What was the biggest surprise for you, or what was a big surprise?
Oh my goodness! I had 5 years of incredible surprises, one after another after another. I can talk to you about what I think of as findings, and I guess you could say that was my biggest surprise, was that they knew about this red state paradox. They were well aware that they were down in every measure of human development, and they were embarrassed about that. But it wasn't the main show. It wasn't what was on their minds. It wasn't what they conceived of as the biggest problem. Mm-hmm. What they saw as the biggest problem could be described through what I came to think of as the deep story. And what's a deep story? A deep story is the truth of a situation as it feels. It's the emotional feeling of this is true, this is really what's happening. And to get to the deep story, you have to subtract facts, you have to subtract moral judgments, and just think about a story as it feels to the person whose story it is. And I came at this project feeling that emotions always underlie political belief, left and right. And there is always emotion at play, but I didn't know quite how to understand how emotions worked. And what I discovered was that this narrative, this story, really got at those feelings. And so what I did was kind of make up a narrative, in fact, and then go back to people that I came to know, some 60 altogether, but 40 really strong Tea Party people, and say, is this how it feels? And I got told, you're reading my mind, I live your narrative. Some people said, no, you got to change. They added to the narrative. Mm-hmm. But here's what the narrative was, this deep story. You're waiting in line for a much anticipated reward. It's a long line, as in a pilgrimage up a hill, and at the top of the hill is the American dream. And you've been waiting a long time, your feet are a little tired, the line isn't moving, but you're facing this prize at the top. And then you see some people cutting in line. Well, who are they? They are blacks who, through affirmative action, are now eligible for jobs that used to be reserved for whites. They are even more so women who are now, through affirmative action, able to have access to jobs that used to be reserved for men. That's like half the population is now in the competition pool.
Presumably that doesn't bother the women so much, or
Well, let's come back to that.
Okay.
Women often vote and feel as wives and mothers more than as workers, although they are all working. And then there are immigrants and there are refugees, and they, even in their deep story, see the oil-soaked, endangered brown pelican, this is the Louisiana state bird, as standing in line ahead of them, as having cut in line. People told me, oh, the liberals put animals ahead of people. So all these line cutters, and then they see Barack Obama in this narrative waving to the line cutters, like he has sponsored them. Oh, he's their president. This nation is divided. He's helping them, and I'm moving backwards in line. And then they say, well, maybe he was cutting in line too. How did he get his education? His mother was a single mother and poor. How did he pay for Harvard and Columbia? I couldn't do that. So they began to see the federal government as the instrument of their downward mobility. That is a fundamental thing that I had not understood, they felt, before. And then in the deep story, someone ahead of them in line turns around and says, oh, you redneck, you ignorant, poor Southern person, you're racist, you're homophobic, you're sexist, and you're fat. A number of people spoke about the norms of body size even as something held against them. So they felt...
Well, it's kind of ironic given Trump's own tendency to comment on people's... but anyway.
Yes.
I digress.
It is ironic.
So, people... there are times when... you see people of a different race or whatever doing well, but it doesn't bother you. You can be in a certain circumstance such that it won't bother you. There's something about the circumstance of these people that makes it bother them, that other people are doing well. What is it? Is it a question of the level of income, or is it some of the social pathologies we've heard about, like the abuse of painkillers or methamphetamines have ravaged these areas, or what do you think are the main sources of discontent that make it so intolerable to see people who seem to be doing better?
Yes, I think they are fundamentally economic. I think that the people that I came to know and befriend were generally blue collar. Either they worked in blue collar jobs or their parents had, and there was the memory of the struggle of a blue collar life. And they felt that the blue collar sector in America was going downhill. And indeed, it is. These are families that have had industrial jobs, and those industries have become highly automated and actually now import foreign labor. I was looking at the economy of Louisiana, and only actually 15% of it comes from industry. The rest are service sector jobs. But those industries are now highly automated. They don't really have many new jobs. And the jobs they do need filled are from PhD chemists from MIT, at one level. And they're, some of the plants are importing Filipino pipe fitters, on immigrant visas. So people feel, whoa, the 1% is taking some of the money away, and then these line cutters are taking the rest, and we're getting...
Well, and the 1% are employing the line cutters so they can have a little more. Their profit margins will be a little higher if they can import slightly cheaper labor.
Right.
I mean, that's the perception, at least.
That's right. Yeah, well, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
There's that, too.
From the company's point of view, absolutely. So I began to wonder how it could be that the companies came off smelling like a rose in a way in their minds. This is slightly off the topic of why they resent the deep story, line cutters, but it is related to how they feel about the government. How come they're working for these industries that are polluting them? And Calcasieu Parish, where I was doing a lot of interviewing, is the 2% most polluted county in the entire country. I mean, it was really polluted. And Louisiana has the second highest incidence of cancer among men and fifth highest death from cancer. So it's really a basic issue and interest in people's lives. So, but and people would talk about pollution. Oh, how the state was the problem. I thought, well, wait a minute. You need the state, don't you, to regulate these guys? Are they going to do it themselves? No, people didn't think that companies would regulate themselves very well. But here's what I think was happening in Louisiana to get people to blame the state and not the company. It is, in fact, an oil state. And that means it's like a captured state, so that these big, powerful oil companies, kind of like the cotton, barons of the 19th century, you have these oil and petrochemical barons kind of dominating the entire scene, including the state. And so, in a way, these companies have given to the state the moral dirty work of pretending to protect the people, but actually doing very easy permitting so that there's tremendous amount of pollution. And so people think, oh, I'm paying money to pay for the salary of the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, but that department isn't stopping the pollution here. I'm mad at the state. And so it works like that.
So
meanwhile, companies are looking good because they take $1.5 billion over the last several years as, quote, incentive money. Oh, don't go to Texas, come here to Louisiana, here's the money. And with that money, these companies then give contributions to the Audubon Society, and they buy the uniforms of Louisiana State football players. They do branding. They make themselves look popular. So from the point of view of a citizen, gosh, the companies aren't looking so bad, and the state is looking.
Well, and the companies also probably provide a certain amount of employment, right? I mean, you probably, a lot of these people have friends who owe their jobs to these companies.
Yes, that's right, but not as many as the companies would make you think.
Yeah. What? Maybe you should talk a little about. I mean, you've talked a lot about jobs and employment. What kinds of jobs do these people do? I mean, what is the range of jobs? Did it range from farmers to roustabouts or what? Yeah.
Okay. Half of the people that I talked to were college educated and generally had professions. There were teachers. There was an accountant.
And were pretty much all of these people Trump supporters? I mean, was that your criterion for getting deeply into their stories?
Originally, my criteria was a supporter of the values of the Tea Party.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay.
So they were conservative, and probably most of them wound up as Trump supporters. I would
right.
say.
In many forms of ambivalence about it.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't jump into the ring right away for Trump, but they've ended up on that side. Yes.
So, but many of them were college educated, you say?
Yeah, half of the ones that
Contrary to stereotype again.
Yeah, and then and mainly local colleges and universities within either community colleges or state colleges. And then the other half worked mainly in industry. They were pipe fitters, or one guy was just an accident fitter. There were plumbers, people generally in the trades.
Mm-hmm. And one thing you hear about is the collapse of traditional sources of community, notably the church, perhaps. Was that any part of the story, or did you actually find a pretty strong community fabric?
A very strong community fabric. What was, I think, anguishing them was that the status of that whole community seemed to be declining, and that their identity was on the decline. I mean, not everybody starts with the identity of their profession, you know. Mm-hmm. That's not the main thing for a lot of people. If they don't have a fancy profession, that isn't how they think of themselves. Right. They tend to think of themselves as deacon in the Pentecostal church, you know, and that this is a point of great dignity and importance, or leading the fund drive for our boys in Afghanistan, you know, or as a member of the Republican Women of Southwest Louisiana, and that you're the head of that, or you're the treasurer of it, or that you're a wonderful neighbor and you have led up. Suppose there's a bad rain and you have to do some sandbagging to stop the floods from entering a particular neighborhood. People would stop what they're doing and volunteer and cook food for those who were doing the sandbagging. And you might have an identity in the organization of that, or for Mardi Gras, who in the neighborhood is organizing this tremendous thing, and they take it very seriously, and they all get, you know, the children on trikes, and everybody, it's like a super Halloween. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of planning around that. So there's an identity that goes with that, and with all of these roles. And somehow they felt that really the importance of all of that kind of goes downhill if you don't have a steady job or a good job. You're less proud. And somehow everything they were and the basis of their identity seemed up for grabs. Many of them, for example, thought, okay, I'm not earning as much as I used to, or certainly as much as my father did. And I don't see that my kid is going to enter this job category and do better either. So that's down. Well, let me take pride in church. And then they look at the general horizon. They say, actually, society is secularizing, and they're looking down on me what my church teachings are about evolution. I'm seen as ignorant. And then they say, well, I'm at least I'm proud of my social values, my pro-family, pro-choice, not pro-choice, pro-life values. But now I see that the law of the land is against those values, and I'm looked down as ignorant and backward and old-fashioned. And then they think, well, So I'll turn to region as a basis of my honor. Well, I'm from the South, and people say, oh, the South, oh, that's the most backward part of the country. And then their identity as even whites, they feel is being disparaged as, oh, well, you're just a redneck. I was often told, well, you can't say the N word, and I never would want to. It's disparaging to blacks.
That's what people said to you.
Yes, they said, you cannot say the N word, and I don't want to. But people freely use the R word, redneck.
Mm-hmm.
And your people say it. They say, well, liberals, coastal people, Hillary's people are seeing, and even when Hillary said, oh, Trump supporters, half of them are deplorable, they said, well, we knew that liberals thought that. And so they feel like a minority group, but they don't want to name their distress because they don't want to join a kind of, as they see it, parade of identity politics poor me's. As they see it, they're the immigrant poor me's, they're the women, battered women poor me's, they're the black couldn't get a chance poor me's, and they don't want to be yet another white poor me. But that's actually how they feel. That's what Deep Story says.
So you mean they don't want to, it sounds like they actually are articulating their grievances to you. Well, you had to kind of unearth, you had to kind of extract it from them by saying, is this your deep story? And they said, yeah, identify with this. You're saying they don't go around kind of specifically and overtly complaining like we are white, Christian, blue-collar people who are being discriminated against. They don't want to put it like that?
They do not want to put it like that, and the reason they don't is they don't like putting it like that in general. Their notion of the honorable self is a stoical one. You can throw a lot of difficulties at me, but
this is another irony, because Trump, one thing that I think is unusual, he's called a bully, but I think he's actually unusual among bullies in what a crybaby he is. He's the exact opposite of stoic. He is a total crybaby. And, well, maybe this should lead us into something we said we would discuss, which is you said these people are some of them are ambivalent about Trump. What are some sources of ambivalence about Trump?
Yeah, but what you're saying about his stoicism and his being unstoical is completely right. And he's actually, when you think of him and Hillary together, she has some of the qualities we have traditionally associated with masculinity. She's kind of stalwart and she hangs in there. She's a toughie, whereas he is, and she's not quite expressive enough, whereas he's expressive all over the place. He's the emotional one, and he's the one who's kind of catty, and he's the one who's interested in people's appearances. He fits a lot of stereotypes, that old-fashioned stereotypes of women.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I suspect he would not be receptive to that interpretation.
I suspect he would not.
So what are some of the main things they're ambivalent about in Trump? Things they wish were, things they'd rather have different in someone who's going to be their leader?
Yes. One couple, the couple to whom I dedicated the book, the Arenos, and he was a pipe fitter at Pittsburgh Plate and Glass, and his wife was worked as a janitor in a local high school, and wonderful people. And they said no. As soon as they saw Trump imitate a disabled man and ridicule such a person, they were completely turned off. He's just not moral, not Christian.
I would have thought that would have lost a lot of Christian votes. Of course,
Yeah.
he's now got this video out that purports to show that actually he didn't mean this. It's totally not plausible. But anyway, that's something that his supporters are latching onto. But anyway, I go ahead. Sorry.
He has, in fact, lost their vote. But many others say, look, he's flawed. I'm worried he'll start a war. That too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that mainly. And why is he putting people down? Why a while is shaming? I think.
What about his lack of humility? One thing that surprised me about his Middle American support is I'd always thought humility was kind of a Middle American value. Did that come up at all?
Well, in that I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so. What they didn't like him shaming so many groups, but they didn't see anything else for them to put them higher up in line. And they thought of Hillary as a continuation of the federal government sponsoring all the others ahead of them. They felt neglected and unseen, and they just saw him as latching onto that, imperfect as he was, and they disbelieved some of the things he claimed to say he would do. For example, one man who suffered a catastrophic environmental accident, and it required the evacuation of all 360 people of his community, and it was terrible. It could have been prevented by regulation, which he himself thought. And Trump has vowed, one of the first clearest things he said he would do is to abolish the Environmental Protection Agency. So wait a minute, you've got a guy whose life is turned upside down, loves his community, lost his community because of environmental absence of regulation, and he's voting for the guy who's planning to abolish the very federal agency. You wonder, well, gee, and I did ask him, how's this fit together? And he said, oh, I don't think Trump means it. He's just saying this to get elected. Then he's going to turn into someone who wouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. So there was this, I would have to say, magical kind of belief that many of the cruel and difficult and harsh things he was saying, he didn't actually believe. So it isn't that they didn't believe in humility in their everyday lives, or even look for it in leaders, but they actually disbelieved quite a bit of what they heard, and perhaps imagined him as a nicer person, more humble person than in fact he is.
Okay, and just to pick up a little on one point we touched on, you said they would say, you're not supposed to say the N-word, we don't want to say it. I take it your view was that, I mean, of course, you might think, well, that's the kind of thing they would say to a Berkeley sociologist who they know would not approve of racism, but I take it your sense was that these are genuinely, by and large, not racist people in the sense that we normally mean that term.
In the sense, we mean that term in so many different senses. And I guess I feel that the whole national conversation about race kind of stopped 3 decades ago, and it super stopped there. Let me give you an example. One man said to me, you know, I'm a reformed bigot. I said, well, tell me about that. What's a bigot? Well, bigot's somebody who uses the N-word or hates blacks. I never have hated blacks, but I have used the N-word before 1967, 66. Then in '67, I said, no, I'm never going to use that word. That's really insulting. That's wrong. And I never have. And he said, if anybody uses that word on my Facebook, I get them off my Facebook. It's not my values. So, but he said, I used to use that word, and everybody else around me did too. So, okay, that's what he meant there. And he said, I said, well, tell me what it was like when your high school was integrated. And he said, well, in the first year, sophomore year of high school, there was one black that came into the class. By my senior year, half the class was black. And I asked him, did you make any new friends? And there was a very long pause. We were out in a boat fishing. And long pause. I mean, it's sort of reeling his fishing. He said, you're making me think. Now, what does that tell me? What does it tell us? I think it tells us several things. One is that he was in a mood to square with me about this. And secondly, for which I was tremendously grateful. And then it tells us that the thinking about it isn't part of the conversation in his world. And as I think about it, it's not part of the conversation in a lot of America. Even still today, I think this is an unfinished conversation. Mm-hmm. And even in Berkeley, it's an unfinished conversation about race relations and friendships. So,
but isn't part of their view that there's just too much talking about it? I mean, there actually, from their point of view, I would think there actually is a whole lot of talking about race. You know, it's an explicit criterion for hiring. You know, affirmative action is one of the things that bothers them. They see Black Lives Matter and getting a lot of airtime on certain media and so on. And I'm sure they're very aware of these so-called speech codes that have become more prominent. Well, have become more elaborately defined, for one thing, on college campuses, involving race as well as gender. Let me maybe ask you this question. Did this sustained encounter lead you to rethink the wisdom of any kind of policies or perspectives that you have traditionally championed? And let me flesh this out. So we've said, that affirmative action bothers them. And now Hillary, I gather, wants to add basically a new dimension to it, because so far gender has not, in law at least, been, equal pay has not been a legal requirement. And I gather she wants to make it one. I assume that the people you're talking about are not enthusiastic about that. And of course, their views on immigration. And then beyond policy per se, I'm sure, there are things like, the Black Lives Matter issue. I mean, not just the people, but the fact that if you say all lives matter, you can get in trouble for that. I mean, there are people who will say, if you say all lives matter, you're actually a racist. I mean, I've heard that, and I would think that these people would be, and it's not an entirely implausible reaction, is like, wait, isn't that the opposite of the truth? Isn't saying all lives matter the opposite of racism? So, I mean, yeah. There are, and that's a perspective. I don't know your own view on which phrase you should or shouldn't say, but you're at Berkeley. This perspective is part of the kind of identity politics that's a big part of the left in Berkeley. And these policies I mentioned, affirmative action, immigration, so on, I think, I pretty well guess what the prevailing view is in Berkeley. Have you asked yourself, I don't mean about like the validity, the intrinsic validity of these policies or perspectives, but have you asked yourself, well, if they're going to have this kind of antagonizing effect, maybe that's a cost we should take into account. Maybe in some of these cases, discretion is a better part of valor.
Yeah. Well, Thomas Frank has a new book out called Listen Liberal. And it argues that the Democratic Party has really lost its way, and it calls itself the party of the working man and working woman and the working class. But if you look at whites, it's almost entirely educated whites, upper middle class whites, who are a Democratic. And whites without college education are majority Republican. A lot are independent, but right-leaning independent. So I think we have to ask ourselves, in what way is the Democratic Party not speaking to the white blue-collar sector, which is a large sector in this country? Maybe they have a point that they have not been spoken to. So I think that issue has to be front and central. And some of the trade deals, NAFTA, for example,
Well, yeah, but a lot of people on the left are already on their side on that. The Bernie Sanders left is already with them there.
And you know what's interesting? A lot of the people that I interviewed had a friendly feeling about Bernie Sanders. Oh, Uncle Bernie, he's pie in the sky. He's not being realistic, but they got him, and I think that is the fissure we can close. I mean, if progressives keep on going and ignoring and vilifying blue-collar whites, they're going to get marginalized themselves and turned inward. And I think the shoe is on the foot of progressives to reach out and see if there can't be some common cause. And I ran into a lot of possibilities during my 5 years of talk. So in a way, I began the book with the red state paradox and end with the blue state paradox, that really it's the progressives who are locked into an enclave and who haven't reached out to really see what's bugging the people that are perhaps blaming the wrong people, those who are cutting in line. So it's that conundrum that I think we have to subtract our stereotypes from and work out with them. What policies would you like to see? And what I found people saying was, look, our leaders are pulling us apart in two directions. Let's get money out of politics. I heard that. I said, you'll find a lot of agreement on that. Let's reduce prison populations, agreement on that. Let's clean up this environment. That shouldn't be a liberal cause. That should be a right-wing cause too. Let's do that. And friendly toward Bernie Sanders. All of these seem to me very interesting possibilities if only we would not assume the worst about the people like those I came to really like.
Although in the end it's about not just policy but kind of perceived respect as well, I gather. And so on that note, can I ask you just a final question? Just the way the social interactions went, kind of. So you show up there. If you had been described to a lot of these people in the abstract, liberal sociologists at elite university, I've got to think they would have a not entirely flattering image of you in their mind.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bridge building work to do. And you walk up and introduce yourself. And of course, there's also the danger of like, oh, you're like an animal in a zoo to me, right? I mean, like I'm going to observe this alien culture that you guys have down here. So given, going in there with that set of challenges, how did it work out? Did you become friends with all these people, and how did they receive you?
Well, some said, oh, you're from Berkeley. Oh, you got a lot of hippies there. I got a lot of that. So it wasn't, hoity-toity elite university at all. It was just the hippie thing. And one guy said, "Oh, you bunch of communists there." So I had a big laugh and took it from there. And basically, there was one man who said, "Oh, you're from California. Oh, which part of California?" Southern would be fine, but Northern was trouble. But you just sit down and talk and, have a coffee. And he was telling me about his life, which was a difficult one. He raised 2 children on his own and a pipe fitter's salary. And, we're talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you, it wasn't as hard as you'd think. Maybe it helped that I had gray hair. Why else would she be here? She's just interested in the country coming apart, and she's looking for common ground. And
Mm-hmm.
and I'm glad she's interested in my story. That's actually the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
You genuinely are, and I genuinely was. And I invite us all to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I got to think it was very gratifying.
It was. It was even fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though we're left with this terrible situation that the country is in, I do feel like I got a sense of the need, whichever way this election goes, we'll have a lot of repair work to do. And I think you could name this repair work sort of diversifying our empathy diversity. And it goes both ways. But on the liberal side, I think the thing to work on is empathy for the people that you think of as your enemies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. The book is Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right. You'll find out within weeks whether you've won the National Book Award, for which you've been justly nominated. I'm betting on you. Remember where you heard it first, that you're going to win, okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.